Jan Sherry from Pont, the ecologist and co-designer of monitoring system, and Karen Roberts, one of the farmers participating in the scheme on Court Farm. And we'll also have a short film explaining and showcasing the project work so far. So I'll hand straight over to Arwell now.
Hello, my name is Arwell Jones, and I'm the project lead on the Llŷn Partnership. Just to give you some background information, I started working on the Cadw Llŷn project in 2004, which was looking specifically at heathland management on the Llŷn Peninsula, looking at capital works, fencing, getting rid of invasive species, access, and also reintroducing grazing onto common land. That was an objective one, funded project, which was about £500,000. At the end of that project, we carried out an evaluation report, and we felt that there was an opportunity to expand the work we were doing to look at the wider landscape, not just at the heathland sites. And on the back of that, we developed a Heritage Lottery funded landscape partnership scheme, which was the Llŷn project that was running from 2009 to 2015. Really good project, 5 years delivery. We continued a lot of the landscape management work that we'd started already, but we also were looking at the built to natural environment, sustainable tourism, access, just a proper landscape scale project. We also managed to get some nature fund money at the end of that project to carry out more work. And going forward, we accessed NRW funding from the Joint Working Fund to kind of plan ahead again and look at what kind of work we wanted to do in the future, looking at terrestrial and the marine environment as well. So the stakeholders for the Llŷn Partnership are Gwynedd Council, who lead, and they employ myself, and we also have some administration support as well from the back office, helping with the payments and so on. We work very closely with the National Trust, who are quite a large landowner down in the Llŷn Peninsula. We're also working with the RSPB, and also now we have both farming unions as stakeholders on the partnership, so the NFU and the FUW as well. I think that's been a very positive development, and getting the unions really on developing and delivering projects is very valuable. So we've been developing and delivering landscape scale projects for the last 16 years. We have a very lean business model where we have a very small pool of project managers who are responsible for coordinating the work, and we deliver the projects through partners, consultants, and contractors. We're always building on the previous projects, we're always looking ahead, and we're always trying to develop exit strategies so that whatever work we do is maintained beyond the project we are delivering at the time. We have a very wide network of people that we work with in Wales, but also we are working with people over in Europe, and a lot of the projects in Ireland who are leading on landscape scale delivery, and many of the EIP projects in Ireland are doing some very innovative and positive work. So coming back to the Tir Amor project that we are running now, we were successful in getting money from the Sustainable Management Scheme, which is managed by Welsh Government. We started that work in 2018, and that project is going to be running for another year, I think. So the main work streams of that project are catchment management work, looking at water quality and how that affects the marine sac that surrounds the Peninsula. We're looking at access, looking at the paths that lead off the Wales Coast Path and how that can bring economic benefits to communities, the inland communities. We've got a work package looking at education and engagement. But the main focus of today is obviously the coastal connectivity work, the Payment for Outcomes trial that we are developing and delivering hand in hand with the National Trust staff. So just to a very short introduction to the Payment for Outcomes scheme. We're working with 3 National Trust tenanted farms to pilot the approach. It's been very challenging to set up because I think this is the first Payment for Outcomes trial in Wales. I think it's especially a live trial. So it's been a challenge to engage with the farmers and get them to buy into this concept of seeing the environment as a product. And over time, with the help of the team in Pont, we've been running some workshops, educating the farmers and giving them the opportunities to feed into this process and be instrumental in the development of the scheme. So at the moment, we are planning to run an end of project conference in 2021. Obviously, with the COVID restrictions, we are very limited in what we can do at the moment. So we will see a film now. We just produced a short film through Hugh Jenkins, and then I'll talk a bit at the end again. If Jan could possibly press the play button, that'd be fantastic.
This is the churchyard in Aberdaron, which is full of coastal grassland species like kidney vetch, rest harrow and birdsfoot trefoil. Last summer we trimmed and raked around the gravestones. We then carried the green hay up to this field at Court Farm. The goal is to introduce new and different seeds to increase the diversity. To prepare the field, a Rytec flail was used to reveal about 60 to 70% of the bare ground. Bare ground is really important. Without it, the sward closes up too quickly and the new seeds don't get a chance to establish. The churchyard green hay with its coastal specialities was spread close to the coastal path. We also transferred green hay from local meadows. One was a coronation meadow about 25 miles away, a really species-rich meadow, boasting about 100 different species of grasses and flowers, including rarer plants like greater butterfly orchid. The cutting and spreading of the green hay had to happen within a few hours because the heat generated can affect the viability of the seed. Fortunately, we had a small army of willing volunteers to help with the logistics. The field was grazed by both sheep and cattle over winter to keep the sward open, and then all grazing was stopped in late March as soon as some of the annuals, such as yellow rattle, started to germinate. And this is what it looks like today, a year after the green hay was spread. We can see a few new species throughout the sward. These include eyebright and lapweed. It's been a really tough year. Winter was really wet and the spring was exceedingly dry. Some of the more drought-tolerant species have increased. Like, for example, catdeer has done really well this year. Other species, such as ribwort plantain, have increased, whereas lesser trefoil has decreased. This is going to be an excellent hay meadow, great for pollinators and great for livestock, providing a varied diet which includes natural anti-parasites. And the more drought-tolerant species will make the meadow more resilient, better able to cope with extremes in the weather patterns. This is part of a wider project to test out a Llŷn payment for outcomes system, whereby farmers are rewarded for achieving habitat-based environmental objectives. Each habitat has positive and negative indicator species and features. The more positives, the higher the score and payment. Payment is for the outcome and not for a predefined action, so farmers can decide themselves which actions they're going to take in order to achieve the results. Cwrt is one of 3 National Trust tenanted farms on Peninsula, which are part of the trial. Each farm is located on the coast, so part of the scheme has been to make improvements in the coastal strip. New cloddiau or field banks have allowed species-rich farmland habitats to expand inland, increasing connectivity for wildlife and improving the resilience of this landscape. However, the PFO model is flexible and can be adapted to any terrain in Wales. Here at Penrhyn Mawr, the fields sloping down towards the sea have great potential for flowering plants and pollinators. However, the grazing pattern to date hasn't allowed them to flourish. The introduction of locally sourced yellow rattle has been accompanied by changes to the grazing regime to enable these flower-rich meadows to flourish and increase in positive indicator species. Yellow rattle is called the meadow maker. It is parasitic on the roots of grasses, so weakens the growth of vigorous grasses that would normally smother the growth of flowers. It makes room for the flowers to grow. And this is one of the fields at Miriau, just down the coast towards Abersoch, where green hay was also added last year. It's so important to see hay meadow restoration as a long-term process. It's not a quick fix. Some seeds will remain dormant for years until they germinate, some even 5 to 10 years after they were introduced. Here at Miriau, the scheme has enabled changes in the fence line right down to the coast and the provision of water so that the coastal grassland can be grazed by cattle at the right times of year to encourage diversity. This really demonstrates that habitat gains can be achieved with modest investment in capital works. Simply by working up a solution with the farmer who knows the site better than anyone, significant improvements have been made. More of the farm can be grazed, and there are more positive indicators growing in this coastal habitat.
I think it's great. We're not just following rules from afar, we're using our local knowledge to achieve the desired outcome, and if we succeed, we are rewarded. It is also a whole farm approach, so the land in the improved grassland category is also included. Here we've sown a herbal hay to provide a more biodiverse and drought-resistant forage on the farm. And it's great to see that the livestock are thriving too.
The Llŷn project is building on the work that has been developed and delivered by the Llŷn Partnership over many years. This collaborative approach has drawn together statutory and environmental agencies, farming unions and charities. The capital works in the Payment for Outcomes trial are funded by the Sustainable Management Scheme through Gwynedd Council, and the reward payments are funded by the National Trust. We're seeking to create a suitable model that could be implemented post-EU to achieve sustainable gains for people, agriculture and wildlife. Food production is important, but not at the cost of the community and the wildlife. They must go hand in hand.
Okay, thank you, Jan. Hopefully everybody saw that. I know it's jumping around a bit, but we will upload that film on YouTube again at a later date. There's some more general information about the PFO scoring system and so on, and I think that's been shared already through the website. Maybe one thing I didn't mention earlier on was that we are working in partnership with similar scheme up in Malham in Yorkshire, the scheme is run up there by the National Trust, partnership with DEFRA, and that scheme is part of the new agri-environment trial in England. So hopefully we have an opportunity to work with them in going forward, developing the new agri-environment scheme for Wales. Okay, I know that's very short and sweet, but I know time is against us. I'm quite happy to answer any questions at the end of the session, and I'll pass it back to Hilary.
So I'll move over now to Jan, the ecologist who's been working on the project, and she's going to talk about the scoring system and how the farms are monitored so that we know what the outcomes are so that we can pay the right amount for them. Over to you, Jan.
Hi, can everyone see me okay? Okay, so I have been working on Llŷn along with Arwell since the Llŷn Llŷn project, when I was in those days still CCW, and then as NRW, and more latterly as Pont. And Pont has been also involved. Hilary was involved in the Nature Fund project on Llŷn as well. So we are very well placed to take on the development of the payment for outcomes scheme project as part of the SMS scheme. Many of us on Llŷn had over the years been impressed by what had been going on in the Burren. I think probably most of us had gone over to the Burren and gone to their winter fair, met with some of the farmers over there and discussed the benefits that they were seeing through their payment for outcomes, and also learned about other payment for outcomes schemes across Europe. And we thought that it was time that we tried something on Llŷn. As Arwell said, we've been working here for 16 years, we've made good relationships, and we thought that this was a good time to start looking at how we could take something forward on Llŷn. Unlike the Burren, we didn't have the luxury of a PhD, which set off their project, and which was obviously gave them a huge amount of data in order to develop their actual scoring system and their parameters and features that they wanted from their different habitats. So we started what I think we're calling it a pre-pilot trial or a pre-trial pilot, I can't remember which way around we're calling it, on 3 farms, with the idea of starting to look at how you could run a payment for outcome schemes and how you set your habitat attributes. So we started this quite a long time ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago, really now, when we first went out, and we had a group of people from various organisations, RSPB, Plant Life, CCW, and then NRW, Pont, and National Trust, where we went out on site and actually began to talk about what it was we wanted from our habitats, what they should look like, and how would we get there. One of the things I think that farmers quite often say to us about agri-environment schemes is that they rarely know what they're trying to achieve, because they don't actually get told what they're trying to achieve or shown what they're trying to achieve. So it's really important that we have an idea in our heads of what it is we want from our habitats. So that was where we started, and we did an initial trial of scoring, took a whole load of people out, set them off in different groups, and saw if we came up with the same score if we all worked individually. We're working on coastal habitat on a National Trust farm in northern Llŷn, which is Pwth Gwylan. And then we went back and refined that until we thought we had something which could work. So our first move after that was to actually start developing some very brief guidance on what we wanted from each of the habitats. So I've got an example in front of me. So for example, for coastal grassland, one of the things we want a sward dominated by fine leaf grasses and herbaceous plants. We want flowering plants which are able to flower through the spring and summer. We want very little litter, so dead material under the thatch of grass. We want minimal cover of things like docks and thistles and other agricultural weeds. And we don't want invasive plants. So we started to draw up those sort of ideas of what we wanted and what we didn't want. And from that, we came up with a list of features for each habitat, and those we scored. So it is quite a complex system, but what we decided on Llŷn was to start complex and then simplify, rather than going first at a very simple level, because you don't know what you're going to miss in terms of the data. So we started in a relatively complex way. So for example, on the coastal habitats, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different attributes which we are measuring on coastal habitats. And that includes things like flowering, presence of indicator species, presence of negative species, covering of litter, etc. So as I say, it's quite complex, but we're going to then simplify at a later stage. So each one of these attributes is scored, and those scores are converted to a system of points 1 to 10, and then the payments are made 1 to 10. With the payments, we fiddled around with this for quite some time, so it took a little while to come up with the right sort of payment regime. But what we decided was that on a 1 to 10 score, scores of 1 and 2 don't get any payment at all. Scores of 3, 4, and 5 get an increasing level, but are quite low. But then when you got to 6, a score of 6, there was a sudden jump up, so that there was a real encouragement for the farmers to take their land beyond that sort of midway point and actually start really making those improvements. So in comparison to, say, something like the payments for glass tier, the top payment of glass tier is around score 5, 6 for us. And then 7, 8, 9, 10 are much higher than glass tier. And then scores 1, 2, 3, 4 are much lower than glass tier. So the idea is that there's real encouragement for those farmers who are involved to actually increase their scores because they will get more payment. So we have produced guidance and scoring for a number of habitats. These include coastal grassland, heathland, semi-improved grassland, hay meadows, arable, and wet grassland, and also improved grassland. And if you noticed in the film, Carwyn mentioned that this scheme also includes the improved. So the idea is, rather than having some of the very species poor ryegrass lays that we have on Llŷn, that you can start looking at the herbal lays and other ways of improving both the soil quality and the biodiversity. So Carwyn, I'm sure, will mention later his herbal lays, which he's sown at Court Farm. So each of those habitats has a scoring system. After the first year, when the three farms entered in 2018, and we went out and did a baseline scoring, and we did then go back to our partners and actually ground truth some of that scoring. Were we actually scoring fields at the right level? And if not, could we modify the scoring system? So at each stage we are refining. This is a learning process for us as well. So we have refined. Each year we've made some refinements. We've also found, for example, that, say, the coastal grasslands, on very few farms do you have a pure coastal grassland. You actually have quite a mix of habitats. So grassland, some of it's maritime grassland, some of it's acid grassland, then you have scrub, heath, and other components. So we've actually developed a coastal mosaic habitat, which we didn't have at the first place. It's a bit more like freeth habitat. So it's really important to remember that it's not just one habitat on the coast. It's a whole range of habitats, and we need to maintain those. So we have made changes as we've gone along. So on the first year we did a baseline survey. Because at the moment the scoring is quite complex, the monitoring is quite time consuming and quite complex as well. So each year we have done monitoring, and that includes quadrat monitoring, so that we have quite good sets of data from which we can draw when we start to simplify the scheme. And we're also taking lots of photographs as well. Even after 2 years, the farms are showing increases in scoring. And some of that is through very simple changes, like as you saw in the film, Muriai has introduced grazing onto its coastal belt, and we're now seeing an improvement in the coastal flora. So immediately their score goes up. We've seen increases on all 3 farms in the first 2 years. And again, this year, I've just done scoring, so nobody knows yet what I've come up with, but we've seen an increase again in scores. So all the farms are improving over this short time period. This year, we had wanted to start the farmer self-monitoring trial, so that we can start making it more simple and getting the farmers to do the monitoring themselves. What we should have had is a period of training with each of the farmers, but of course COVID came along and we couldn't do that. So instead the farmers were sent a training, a monitoring manual for coastal grassland, and were asked to go and do it on their own, which was really hard for them, but fair play, they've all done it. And that's going to give us information about how we take this forward. And I have now prepared simple farmer guidance for monitoring of 4 of the habitats. So we hopefully can take that forward. This includes taking photographs, and it's interesting talking to some of the participants that they found it quite tricky. Some of the things they found tricky is actually taking repeated photographs from the same place, something that we as ecologists do all the time, but you know, it is actually quite difficult to remember where you took that photograph from. So that was one point one of the farmers made to us. So there are things that we're learning from this. Where we want to go next with this project is to actually develop some kind of online app where the farmers could be entering the data themselves straight online. They could be putting their photographs straight online. It will be a much quicker process. And then we can develop a simplified scoring system based on what's coming back and based on our data that we've been collecting for the last 3 years. So that, you know, by the end of the next period of this scheme, which we hope we will be able to get funded, we should have a system which could be expanded out to more farms, and where the farmers themselves are going out and doing the monitoring with intermittent monitoring from someone like myself or another ecologist. A key to this whole approach is working with the farmers. So although the farmers have the choice on what management they want to do, very often they want guidance, and they also want to be told when they've been doing things well. And it's been really good. We met Carwyn out in site last week or the week before, I think, and it was really good to see how things were progressing on his farm. Too often with agri-environment schemes, there isn't that positive feedback. You get told when you do something wrong, but you don't get told when you do something right. So it's really important with payment for outcomes to actually say to the farmers, yeah, this is exactly what we wanted. This is looking so much better, or you need to do a bit more of this, or whatever. But that feedback is absolutely essential. So it is really important to have people working with the farmers on the ground. And I think that's where there's a fundamental difference from, say, something like Glassetier, where there hasn't been that engagement between the farmers and the contract managers. So going forward, developing the app, working more with the farmers. Hopefully, if there's no COVID, we can actually do the training for the other habitats and look at the coastal belt again with the farmers, so that they can be more confident in monitoring next year. So we've made a good progress, but there's a lot more that we need to do in the future years. So I'll hand you back to Hilary, and she'll take you forward.
Thanks very much, Jan. That was really interesting. I'm just going to have a chat with Carwyn now. So he's farming at Court in near the National Trust site and near Aberdaron, and he's been working really hard on many of the aspects of the Payment for Outcomes scheme. So it'd be really interesting to ask him a few questions and highlight what he's done so far. So Carwyn, can you unmute yourself? That's brilliant. So what have you done on the farm so far as part of the Payment for Outcomes?
Well, we started, we put an earth bank in along 5 of the fields to differentiate between hay meadows and the grazing fields. We double fenced them all. We put some nice new water troughs and nice new gates along those fields. 2 of those will be reversions to coastal heathland, or coastal slope, sorry, and another 3 we've reseeded into hay meadows, and well, yeah, with the difficult winter we've had, they're coming all right. We've also put in some scrapes on our wetlands just for the birds. Sorry about this. As you can see on the video, last year we put the right deck across the hay meadows, one existing hay meadow, and we carried some green hay and spread it on the ground. Yeah, that's they're coming all very well. Yeah.
So I came out and did some monitoring with Jan a couple of weeks ago, and we found an increase in some of the different species in your meadows. But we also found that you had a lot of arable weeds in some meadows, didn't we?
Yeah.
But they're looking beautiful with those. Have you changed your grazing at all, or your stocking levels?
Yeah. Well, just before we got to a stage on the farm, we were very intensive, to be honest. And when payment for outcomes came in, we cut down our sheep numbers and sort of thought that we need to go somewhere better, do something better. We're not making any money at all, or we were losing it, to be honest. And we thought we should cut down our sheep numbers, cattle numbers, actually increased the cattle numbers, and changing grazing, the way we graze. I was thinking this year going more rotational grazing, but with the COVID, I wanted somebody to come and show me a bit, but we couldn't this year, but hopefully things will be better for next year. On the fields, I've strip grazed the cattle more this year, so that's hopefully it's extended our grazing. As things look at the moment, with the dry spring that's pretty difficult, and we managed to get some silage and everything, and so everything worked pretty well.
You've been particularly happy with the improved grassland, with the seeding into those.
Pardon, sorry.
You were particularly happy with the results of seeding into the improved grasslands, weren't you? Can you just explain a little bit about that?
Oh yeah. So sorry. We had two fields. We winter our cattle out, our cows out, and we were talking to Andy from the trust, thinking of putting something in, and he asked us if we consider herbally, and we did this year. Well, last year, sorry, as our first summer of grazing. It's it's our version of herbally, and it's came along pretty well through the dry spring we had. It kept growing. With the keep rooting crop, it did. Trying to think of the word. Well, it grew through all the dry spell.
Yeah.
Well,
it was looking well when we came out. You've got chicory in there, haven't you, to improve your soil structure, and quite a few other herbal things. So what have your impressions been of the project so far?
Yeah, well, the project I liked it. I like some more. Sorry about my way of saying. There's a more relaxed way of doing things. Not relaxed as in the practices isn't relaxed. But the relaxed way you can easily find somebody to speak to. If there's any problems, you just pick up the phone. You don't have to feel you're admitting to something that you shouldn't be. You can just pick up the phone and ask for advice. And much better than previous things we've been doing, schemes or.
Yeah. And have there been benefits to the farm business?
Yeah. Firstly, sorry, with the cattle, we've changed from continental cattle to well, stabilizer. We stopped doing our bull beef, so we've gone to grazing our steers, which are we're on the first year of fattening them off the herbal hay, just coming along. They seem to be coming along pretty good. But we'll cut the cost of the cost of feeding them in, and as much concentrate as that. Also with how things are going with Europe, it looks like last year, well, not last year, it looks like it will come to an end, and single farm is coming to an end, and it's just it's looks as if things are going to go more into the
Payment for nature benefit.
That's the one, sorry.
That's all right. You're doing really well.
We thought we'd rather be on the forefront of it by doing this than being behind and trying to follow everybody.
Yeah. You've been working really hard at sort of managing the hay meadows and everything as well, haven't you? And your coastal slopes.
Yeah, we've done our best.
So have you had the grazing on the coastal slopes this year?
No, we haven't grazed them this year. We were hoping before the COVID, we're going to make some tracks down through the fields and outwinter cattle on the slopes. So we were growing a buffer through the summer, and then outwinter our cattle over the winter is the plan. But yeah, those things we haven't grazed them yet. But we will do over the winter. Hopefully. That's if all goes to plan.
Yeah, so that'll help with cost savings on winter bedding and feed and all sorts, won't it?
Yeah, of course. We have, at the moment we haven't got any. We haven't got enough shed space for the cattle, so that'll have to come in a big help for us. And we also put these cattle out on 4 feet, so it's a bit expensive to grow. So the coastal slope will come in very handy for you.
Brilliant. So, sort of summing up from that, we're sort of early days on the project with you, but you can see that it's heading in a positive direction, and you're particularly pleased with the herbal lays.
Yeah.
And your gates and troughs.
Yeah, it's a big help. Well, to be honest, it was just tidying up by putting new fences, new gates, troughs in herbal lays. Just it helps you financially, helps you by doing that. So.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Carwyn. You can turn your microphone off now.
So sorry about that. Thank you.
No, you've done really well. Thank you. So it's sort of opened up now to questions from the public, and we've had a few that have come in. So we'll just see how many we can get through between now and 5 o'clock, or a couple of minutes to 5. So I'll start with, this looks like an exciting project with lots of work that's gone into developing it. Do you think a project like this could be rolled out across wider Wales as part of a future farming policy? And I'll just open this up to Arwell and Jan.
I'll go first. I think, the model is very flexible, so it could be adopted anywhere really. Obviously, we've been lucky enough to be able to access the knowledge from Ireland, and we've utilised that to develop the scheme here on the Llŷn Peninsula. If we can get this kind of technical side of the project, using technology to monitor and so on, I think it could become very easy to roll this out in any habitat or in any landscape in Wales, but as long as the vision is there to develop such a scheme, and the money is available to pay the farmers for producing the quality of environment we're looking for.
It's always going to be important, isn't it, to have a baseline to work up from. So I think establishing that is probably going to be an important part of that. Do you agree with that, Jan?
Yeah, so I would say yes, that this could be rolled out elsewhere in Wales, particularly once we've worked at the simplifying. One thing I would say is the approach that one size fits all, which tends to have been the way we've had with agri-environment, doesn't work and won't work for this. Even between these 3 farms, we've seen the 3 coastal belts are completely different. So you have to have a scheme which builds in flexibility. You can't compare the coastal grassland at Court to the coastal grassland at Miriai. So comparing coastal grassland in Llŷn to Pembrokeshire or Gower, you can't do that, but you can use it as a basis, and you just have to develop the indicators so that they're suitable for where you are. And that, I think, isn't that difficult to do. And I think it just needs a different way of thinking. So instead of saying all grassland should look like this and all heathland should look like this, you just have a bit more flexibility in your system.
Brilliant, thank you. Al just wants to say something.
Yeah, I think you could also tie a scheme like this into, you know, something else. So if you say you want to manage, you know, we've always obviously got a all Wales path all the way around the coast, and that coastal strip needs to be managed for recreation as well as to be farmed. So, you know, there's an opportunity there to, by working with different funding pots, to find solutions to manage that land possibly.
Great. So the next question is, how does tree planting and woodland management fit in with the project? Well, do you want to start with that?
I'll go very quickly. If anybody knows the Llŷn Peninsula, you don't find many trees. You know, it's just another element of the project that can, if you develop a scoring system for it, it can be part of the project. I know Jan will be able to fill in there.
You going to say anything, Jan?
Yeah, sorry. Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, as I always said, there's not a huge amount of woodland, or even hedgerows are relatively sparse on Llŷn just because of the climate. But there are patches of woodland. We didn't develop a woodland scoring system for that very reason, although Court has got one of the very few pieces of woodland, and it's something we could take forward. But undoubtedly, woodland and tree planting, but also natural regeneration could be part of this scheme. I personally favour natural regeneration where you can have that. We've certainly talked about tree planting in terms of buffering streamside corridors and other wetland areas. So there's no reason why tree planting, natural regeneration and woodland management couldn't be included in this, particularly if that woodland management is part of the agricultural system. As from a pond perspective, we're always encouraging people to look at their woodlands in terms of grazing and actually incorporating them into the farming system, because that can have a lot of biodiversity benefit. So there's no reason why this couldn't be taken forward, as woodlands couldn't be taken forward as part of the project. And whilst I'm here, I might as well say there were some habitats that we didn't end up testing on Llŷn. For example, although there's loads of heathland on the Llŷn coastal belt, there is none in these 3 farms. So, you know, there are other heathlands, there are other habitats that we need to trial.
Thank you very much. Karen, would you be interested in having some kind of element of tree management on Court if it had been offered?
Yeah, there's a little piece behind the shed where we've got a few trees growing. If you think you can grow trees on the Llŷn, we'll give anything a go.
So you're managing a piece of your sort of valley down to Porthmeadwy is sort of woody and scrubby, isn't it?
Yeah.
And work's been done on that in previous projects. It's just a tiny bit to add into this one, really, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, and next question is, it's very important to trial projects like these in Wales. How resource heavy is it? How much funding was required to undertake the project? And do you think the Welsh Government should be looking at funding and trialling more PFO projects? So this is for Arwell and Jan now.
I don't think it's that expensive to set up. The biggest issue is to it's linked to derogation, and obviously if people are tied into an existing agri-environment scheme, it's very hard to double fund anything at the moment. So we've been very lucky due to the commitment of the National Trust to the scheme and putting in private money to actually fund the payment. That's the only way we've been able to develop the trial. It comes back to policy really. If Welsh Government want to go down this route, it's possible. If they don't, no, it isn't. So, you know, we've actually gone ahead and trialed the system, which works in other countries, and we've been able to show that it could work very easily here if the appetite is there to roll something like this out.
So have you got a figure for how much between the SMS and the National Trust has gone into this 3 years?
I think from the payment point of view, you know, obviously because there's a capital works element to the project, it totally depends on the work required on each individual farm. And then obviously the payments that the farmers receive is again based on exactly on what work they propose to do. So without going into massive amounts of detail, obviously if we want to create certain habitats in certain places on farms, we have to pay a lot of money for that to happen in the first place, but then habitat is going to be there long term. So you know, there's no appetite to turn every field on every farm into hay meadows, because you know, there's no production then. So the whole point of this scheme is that it's holistic and it brings benefits for nature, for the economic side of the business, and also for the public as well that use the walking facilities and so on in the farm. So it's very hard to answer that question, but from talking to the Irish projects, they think that they can manage and deliver the projects for the same cost as the national schemes.
Okay, yeah. It's great to see farmers and conservationists working together. How important is this to the success of the project, Jan?
Hi, sorry. Yes, well, I think that's absolutely critical. When I remember when I worked for CCW, and it was Tir Govel days, and going out round some farms to look at how their heathland, it was their heathland creation schemes had been faring. And one of the things that they said to me, so many farmers said to me, is that nobody had ever come out and really talked to them about what progress they had made. And that it's really difficult to work in that sort of vacuum. So I think that relationship between the farmers, people delivering the scheme, and conservationists is really critical. I think you know, we should all be talking together and developing the scheme together. And I think that's why it has worked in other parts of the world, because particularly in the Burren, but also across Europe, where you see farmers and conservation working together. So I think just having a scheme where you've got the farmers doing their bit, and then somebody draws it up and maybe sends them a payment or maybe fines them or whatever from a distance, this just doesn't encourage people in the right way.
Carwyn, how have you found it, having conservationists skipping about on your land?
Sorry. Yeah, I found it very interesting. I don't know enough about conservation. It's nice to have a friendly chat with somebody who'll teach you, show you things, new things, and the end of that it'll be you get paid what you learn. You get paid for it in the end. So yeah, I have no problem with it at all. It's been very helpful.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Next question: how do you account for external factors that are outside the farmer's control that might affect the result or outcome, e.g. extreme weather events like drought or flooding? Who wants to answer that?
I can answer that. I mean, that's an interesting one, because of course this year we had extreme drought on Llŷn. Llŷn is a very droughty place anyway in the best of years, and this year it was very difficult, and going out and doing the monitoring, we didn't see exactly what we thought we would see. But actually having, if you can get the farmers also doing the monitoring, so sending in your photographs, etc., at various times of the year, you can still monitor the habitat, even if there has been outside events. So, you know, if the habitat had been looking like it was going the right way in April before the drought really set in, and then later on in the summer it was in a poorer condition, you know that that's probably nothing to do with what the farmer's been doing, but that's to do with the drought. So you can take some things into consideration. There are, of course, some events that maybe you really would struggle with, you know, when we're talking about, you know, if you've had a big heathland site and there was massive fire which wasn't caused by the farmer, then, you know, it is very difficult, and you'd have to think carefully about how you actually work with the farmer to ensure that they're still rewarded, but that habitat is able to be restored or allowed to regenerate. So yeah, I think there are ways of doing it. I think all year round as well. The other thing is don't just monitor your habitats in the summer when they're at the best. You need to look and see what it looks like in the winter. And we have been doing that, been going out in the winter. And again, it'd be really good to the farmers know what it should look like in the winter. So that they have an idea of how the habitat is progressing. So then if there is an event, say like a drought, at least you know what direction the habitat's going in at an earlier time in the year. I think there are ways and means of doing this. It's more difficult when you're including species as a payment for outcome. So I know there are some projects which are specifically designed around species, like the Hen Harrier project. And that can be very difficult, but you can start looking at things like proxies for measuring, you know, how well the habitat is doing in terms for that particular species. And I think you can also look at ways of scoring habitat for species and then giving bonus points if those species are actually there. So I think there are ways of doing it. It's just, it needs some thinking.
Thank you very much. It's great to hear the work that Carwyn's been doing at Court. Are the wider farming community on the Llŷn aware of the project, and how have they reacted or responded, if at all?
So obviously you have the 3 PFO farms. We also have the Llŷn trial farm, which is also incorporating a lot of this good practice as well. Obviously, I mentioned at the beginning we were hoping to run workshops and a conference this summer, which will not now happen until next year. But there's a lot of interest in the concept, and I think, like anything else, when you've got a new system, people are a bit wary. But I think when you talk to the people over in Ireland, you know, the farmers there perceive the landscape or the habitat as a product in the same way as they look at sheep or cattle. So the better the quality of that product, the more money they get for it. And if you understand that concept, which most farmers do, then it's quite easy to explain how it works.
Brilliant. So there's the final question. How does the project help tackle climate change? Are you measuring soil carbon in the different habitats, for example, Jan?
Hi, so we haven't actually monitored soil carbon, although the National Trust did do some very extensive soil sampling at the start of the project. So it is something that we can repeat at the end of the project. To have a look at how that's changed. Where we're going to probably see the biggest differences is in places where, for example, like Carwyn's Herbal Ley, where I think we will see changes in the way in the soil. It's not just the soil carbon, but soil structure as well. Because the initial trials throughout Llŷn has shown that a lot of the improved land has very, very poor quality soil, very damaged soil structures, and therefore they're not so good at sequestering carbon. So I think it would be good to redo that again, but that's something that could be taken forward on another trial, or in at least an extension to the trial. We can start looking at carbon more specifically if there were money to look at that in the trial. I'll hand you over to Arwell. I think you've got something to say.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that obviously I think Karen touched on it a few times, just the way that the farming model is changing. It's a much less carbon intensive system that the farmers who are part of the PFO scheme are buying into. You know, you're not providing fodder for the animals. You're not shipping in soya from, you know, Burns rainforest in Brazil, or, you know, so you're working with what's there already as well. So I think from the farm business point of view, you know, we are aligning that with carbon. Live, just about. So.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So we're on 3 minutes to 5 now. So it's just a bit of a roundup that I hope people have learnt something about the PIMP for Outcome scheme. Arwell is available for anyone who wants to send in questions following this, and you'll pick them up, won't you, Arwell, off YouTube later. And yeah, if anyone's got any more things they want to discuss or ask about, just feel free to get in touch with the project.